This last week was extremely busy for me, and on top of all that, I got sick, which may be obvious from the sound of my voice. It wasn't anything serious, but just enough to really make me struggle when it came to being productive. So, in my weekend state, I decided to stay away from games that would require quick thinking, fast reflexes, or anything too strenuous for my brain fog to overcome. So I turned to a puzzle game that caught my attention. Even with my brain not fully functioning, I could at least take my time with the puzzle game and enjoy the scenery a bit. Just a tiny bit of a heads up for this review as well. I'm going to be repeating some of the footage while I talk about the game. It's a short experience and also a puzzle game, so I don't really want to just give away solutions or spoil things for people interested in playing. I try to keep these reviews as spoiler-free as possible, unless there's something I really want to dive into that I can't avoid spoiling. So the footage may become monotonous, but that is by design. Cocoon is the first game released by the developer Geometric Interactive, a studio founded by Jep Carlson and Jacob Schmid, who were responsible for the studio that created Limbo and Inside. Carlson was also the lead gameplay designer for both of those games as well. I didn't know much about Cocoon when I jumped into it, but knowing where it came from, I figured it would be short, have a narrative that wasn't straightforward at all, and have some really fun puzzle mechanics. Unlike Limbo and Inside, which were side-scrollers, Cocoon takes a top-down view which gives the player a little bit more breathing room. Obviously, there's a lot more color and vibrance here in Cocoon as well compared to the older games. In Cocoon, you play as some kind of bug-like creature on, well, some kind of journey. Frankly, there's not a lot given in the way of narrative in the beginning. As someone who has beaten the game and others who have as well, there are some things that point to a story or meaning behind the game, but I'd have to essentially spoil the ending even to discuss that. So, for the sake of staying away from spoilers, I'll be as ambiguous as the game itself is. You come out of a cocoon, you are a bug-like creature, and there's a path with puzzles to solve. The developers have always kind of just dropped the player into a mysterious world without much explanation, but I've always felt that added to the excitement of exploration itself. The first few puzzles are extremely simple, most likely just there to act as a soft tutorial to explain the functionality of buttons and platforms, but as you move along a bit, you get to the real meat of the puzzles. Very soon after starting your journey, you get locked into an area with a platform. Upon using the platform, boom, you were taken out of the area you were just in, which is placed neatly inside this little orb. Coming out of this orb awakens some kind of creature that you have to find and defeat in order to unlock the ability of its particular orb. While outside of the orb, you can carry it to other locations, which is important since they act as kind of keys or power sources in certain areas. Furthermore, each of these tiny worlds has a different kind of puzzle mechanic that is necessary in order to progress through the game. For example, the reddish-orange orb is needed to reveal and cross these bridges that are otherwise impassable. As the game progresses, more orbs are introduced, and it quickly becomes a juggling act of which orb needs to go where and which orb needs to be used in order to continue. On top of all of that, you can take the orbs in and out of each other, then even go inside of that orb that's already in an orb. As you might expect, this can get confusing really quickly, especially when it's not clear what next steps need to be taken in order to progress. At one point I had stopped for a bit to eat some lunch, and when I came back it took me a few minutes to even remember what I was doing or where I needed to go next. With that in mind, however, we come to the first significant thing in the game design that's going to have people split into two camps. In fact, a lot of the things I have to say about Cocoon are almost sitting right on the fence of whether it's a pro or a con. Before we continue, I'll make it as clear as possible. I liked Cocoon. A lot of reviews I saw either hated this game or praised it as a masterpiece. Personally, I enjoyed my time with Cocoon, but I'd have a hard time calling it a masterpiece. I find myself compelled to explain this now because as I discuss some of the ways the game works, they're going to sound like either backhanded compliments or sugar-coated criticisms. Frankly, that's just because I can arguably see both sides of the coin being understandable. So as I mentioned earlier, things can get confusing really quickly, but thankfully the overall game feels very linear. Of course, I think that most gamers hate to hear that a game is linear, but in this particular case, I think it was very much intentional. There aren't many places to explore. Even these little glowing bridges seem like they have branching paths, but they either become a dead end or wind up wrapping around to the intended path. While it is a bit of a disappointment for those who really enjoy and favor exploration, I can't imagine how lost I would have gotten with multiple winding paths inside of multiple layers of worlds. It would quickly become a nightmare of a maze, jumping into a world to find the right direction, then jumping into the next world thinking that the path is there, only to wind up turned around and lost. So while things are certainly linear and exploration takes a hit, I think this was done on purpose for simplicity's sake. The brainpower should be focused on how to solve the puzzles rather than remembering pathways. While the puzzles are intriguing and the major selling point of the game, what I enjoyed the most was the boss fights. In order to unlock an orb's special power, you have to defeat a boss. As you can imagine, each of these bosses fight differently and are overcome in different ways. Their designs were intriguing, they all corresponded to the orb's ability you're working to unlock, and they're a delightful little break from all the puzzles. In terms of difficulty, they weren't too hard. If you get hit once, you basically have to start from scratch, so you have to defeat them in one go without getting hit. An interesting little note is that they don't actually seem to injure you or kill you, but rather just throw you out of the arena and the orb. It was just a clever little design choice that made the game feel like it stayed fluid without game over screens breaking up the flow. In fact, Cocoon's flow is kept really consistent throughout as well. I never got stuck on a puzzle and I never got lost due to the linear design. Because of this, Cocoon is relatively short, taking me about 4 hours to complete. For some, that may make the price tag of $25 feel a bit steep. I have always taken the stance that if the content is worth it, the game's length isn't as much of a factor. I'm fine with a game's length being short as long as the experience is captivating and fun. Whether or not Cocoon is worth the price will ultimately be subjective to each individual, but for me, I have a hard time convincing myself that it's worth every penny. In fact, I'd probably suggest to most people to wait for it to go on sale before diving in. While I clearly don't mind a game's length being shorter, I felt myself wanting more out of Cocoon. Normally, I prefer short and sweet experiences where there's little to no padding, but here I believe the puzzle mechanics could have been pushed just a little further. I thoroughly enjoyed the puzzles, but ultimately felt like things just scratched the surface. I usually advocate for ideas being used, then either switching up the mechanics or adding on to them in order to keep progression feeling fresh and nuanced. However, with Cocoon, I felt like not just the mechanics, but the entire game was over quicker than I could fully appreciate every aspect of it. I think that this is where a less linear approach would have benefited greatly, even if they would have just added some side puzzles or extra challenge fights with hidden bosses. I'm not saying that they should add fluff in order to pad the runtime, but some more content would have been nice. I guess what I'm saying is I just wanted more game. Ultimately, it just felt like it was missing a certain quality. On the other hand, perhaps that certain quality has nothing to do with length or the mechanics of the game at all, but rather something less obvious. Originally, I had told myself that I wasn't going to compare Cocoon to Limbo or Inside, because clearly they were trying to go in a different direction with this game. However, in their description and even the marketing, they heavily pushed the idea that this was from the same developer as the two, so I see it as fair game. Limbo and Inside have a distinct characteristic that separates them both from their bug-like successor. The former two have an ambiguous, mysterious atmosphere that hooks the player into questioning the intentionally cryptic storyline. There's a palpable sensation of both curiosity and dread as these two protagonists continue forth on their journey. I think that sensation is due to the world design around them. It pulls the player in directly, building tension and intrigue. Cocoon, on the other hand, lacks that magnetism. I think it simply comes down to the core premise being so abstract that it doesn't give the audience something to easily connect to. Little boy in a creepy forest? What's he doing here? Running from people shooting at you? Why are they chasing us? In Cocoon, we're a bug person that comes alive, can jump around through planet portals, and are just on an otherworldly journey. It's a weird premise, so when I see a world that's both organic and machine-like, instead of being curious, I just brush it off as, well, everything else has been weird, so why not that? Maybe that's just how things work here. The prior protagonists act as an anchor that keeps us tethered to reality, so that when something crazy does happen, it makes it all the more bizarre. I'm not saying that if Cocoon replaced the bug protagonist with a young child that would fix all of its problems, for the record. I just feel it's lacking a certain spark that its two predecessors had, which really made them feel intriguing and worthwhile. In the end, Cocoon is a pleasant little puzzle game that I had a good time with. It didn't blow me away or change my life, but not every game needs to. It was precise, focused, and well polished. The graphics and the soundtrack were nothing that made my jaw drop, but there was absolutely nothing wrong with them either. The atmosphere was cohesive, even if confusing and perplexing at times. All in all, if you're a big fan of puzzle games, then this is a no-brainer and worth purchasing. The orb mechanics alone are interesting enough. If you're a fan of Limbo and Inside and were hoping for something similar to those two, you won't really find it here. If you're on the fence about it, hopefully I've helped persuade your mind one way or another. Hey, if you made it this far, thanks so much for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it. I normally review indie games here, so if you liked the video and are looking for more game suggestions, consider subscribing. Have a great day and stay magical.